So I think a lot of what came forward in the indicators assessment, the national assessment, has been discussed. But from the perspective of media development and media viability indicators, there are two aspects of journalist safety that we have focused on, that the indicators focus on. One is the ability of journalists to practice the profession safely, and within that we have multiple indicators as well. But overarchingly, the ability of journalists to practice their profession safely, and the second is a climate of insecurity, the presence of a climate of an insecurity, which is what a lot of what has been discussed alludes to. So I'll start with what we found about the women journalists, because that has been an issue that I think 10 years ago when we were discussing the women, the UN action plan, it was not something that we had anticipated perhaps. And I'm saying this as someone who was a part of the consultative meetings before the plan was even drafted. What was at the forefront at that time in Pakistan, specifically given Pakistan conditionality, was physical threats. We were seeing an unprecedented amount of attacks on journalists. We were seeing killings. We were seeing killings of reporters who were covering political beats, which was still new to us. It was a shock to us because this is happening in urban centers. This is not the tribal areas. This is not Balochistan. This is Karachi. At that time was the hub of journalist killing. So a lot of focus at that time was on the physical threats, and the plan also responds to that. Over the last 10 years, I think the way the situation has issues is now linked to the question of viability, the question of financial independence. And these two areas have been somehow within the Pakistani media industry been integrated and exploited in such a way that the climate of insecurity has been furthered. So for example, a journalist who's not being paid, a media industry who's dependent on government advertisements and public advertisements for its very survival cannot be independent, and the editorial policies of the media industry reflects that situation. And when that reflects, and then the polarization comes on media screen, which is something we found in different indicators within the assessment, polarization is being reflected on the screen. The public is seeing media as a party to either the government or the opposition parties. And so the public support that we enjoyed, which Myra pointed out as well, that has been taken back. Media has been very systematically discredited, and a trust deficit has been created in a way that the media industry is seen now as something that exists at a distance from the general public. And as a result, what we see is obviously the climate of insecurity has increased, but also the tools to attack media, they have changed a lot. Of course, physical attacks, torture, kidnapping, they're still going on. But I think FN's report last year highlighted that 60% of the attacks that they had identified were related to legal threats, cases, intimidation through FIA. So the use of legalized instruments as a method, as an instrument to intimidate journalists into either silencing themselves or creating a situation of legal insecurity, that has increased a lot. Then the other thing that we found is what Farutullah Babar Saab was indicating, the trolling, the online attacks and harassment. In a research that we did last year, what we found with women journalists, based on a survey with women journalists across Pakistan, we found that 9 out of 10 women journalists said that if they do not self-censor online, they face threats, and that includes threats with the threats of sexual violence, threats of murder, threats of attacks against their families. We also found that 80% of women journalists were saying that when they're online, when they're in public spaces, they self-censor their personal opinion, not even just professional opinion, but also what they're feeling personally, their personal opinions on things, and if they don't do that, they do face attacks. And this 80% is significant for me because we did the same research 2 years ago. We did it in 2018 too, and this percentage at that time was 60%. So in 2 years, we saw 20% more women journalists saying they are now forced to self-censor because of the increase in threats that they are facing. Then we hear a lot of discussion when we talk in the government circles, when we work on advocacy, and that's what our research is also leading to. There has been an increase, obviously, in the public consultations that have been undertaken. Something that obviously the credit goes to be an action plan as well. There has been an increase in consultations that different government ministries hold with civil society members, etc., etc. However, the conversation still tilts predominantly towards enactment of more legislation. So when I was analyzing the laws that govern the media in Pakistan, that regulate the media in Pakistan, what I saw was, at various different levels, freedom of expression and freedom of the press is being governed. Obviously, we have the Article 19. I'm sure everybody sitting here knows it's right to freedom of expression is not absolute, it's conditional. The Article 19 enacts the first restrictions on the freedom of expression. Then in penal code, we have sedition, we have defamation, we have libel. So it's not, people often think of PEMRA as the one thing that governs the media, but it's not. We have the constitution, structural laws like the penal code, they have different sections governing the media, affecting the freedom of the press. We have criminal laws. Article 11W of the ATA, of the Anti-Terrorism Act, that is a law that has been used for a very it's a dangerous verdict from Balochistan High Court during an era where media was actively being targeted by the terrorists as well. So we have the ATA, we have the Prevention of Electronic Crimes, we have sectoral laws within the Pakistan Telecommunication Act, for example. There is a section that deals with content. So it's not the idea, and I'm mentioning this specifically in light of what Babur Saab also mentioned, given cognizance to FIA, and this is an argument we've been hearing again and again by all the governments that the law is not strong enough, we need more stronger laws. No, it's not only strong enough, but it's layered on so many ways that there is literally no way somebody who engages in illegal expression on the press would be able to get away with it if the laws, if the legal system that currently exists is applied to that. So within that context, we have and this is the final thing I'm going to say in interest of time, we have the question of viability, and the question of viability specifically in the context where digital media is increasing. Right now, we do not have a legal system that governs digital media in terms of licensing, but that's not for a lack of effort. During the last 5 years, we saw two definite specific attempts, the Pakistan Media Development Authority, the Pakistan Media Regulatory Authority, and a set of rules that was put forward for the regulation of OTT platforms. All three of them attempted to bring in legislations, bring in a regulatory mechanism that, if enacted, would have made it mandatory for people running YouTube channels, for people running news websites, to get a license to do that, to pay a licensing fee, be brought under a regulatory authority's jurisdiction, and this was being done without regard to whether they're practicing as a part of media industry or whether doing that as a citizen of Pakistan expressing their free expression. Coming from a research perspective, I think the thing that strikes out most is how interconnected the financial viability situation has become, how it's been exploited. And I'll end with something, I know I've been thinking about it, and I don't know if it's politically correct to say, frankly speaking, because one of the initial, I think, wars, the battles we fought with the government was over the definition of a journalist. And I remember specifically saying, no citizen journalists are journalists, and they have to be brought in. We have to bring in protection for digital journalists. And then the first thing that happened when the previous government comes into power is this meeting with TikTokers and YouTubers, completely excluding the media industry. And over the last 4 years, what we've seen is an environment wherein a YouTuber sits in a freshly dug grave for Arshad Sharif, literally lying down in it and talking about how the grave has been done. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, was this the definition I was looking for? Because we did win that battle, right? The journalist safety law acknowledges people who are producing digital content as journalists. But is that the journalist who's a guy lying down in a grave of a journalist who's been assassinated for views? And I really don't know, like personally, over the 10 years, that I really don't know if that was a battle worth fighting for, and that is a battle that I feel good about having.